Hello, welcome to this Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. Welcome to Stream Streak 100. Day 100. Triple figures. I am super excited. And I'm joined by a personal hero of mine and also a hobby hero to many, Mr. Vince Venturella. Did I get the name
Hey,
right? I paused because I was scared of getting the last name spot on.
I sensed your hesitation, but no, you got it correct. It was very good. It was excellent work, Rob. Professional as always, to the core. That's you.
Thanks so much. It's lovely having you on the show. Thanks for being here. Vince, if we could get some love for Vince in the chat. He got up super early just to come on the show today, so I mega appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem, man.
And just to kick everything off real quick, the thank you to everyone who listens to the podcast. Please stay hydrated. Big love to everyone who's already subscribed and donated. MJ Pegasus, I see you donated some subscriptions in the chat. So thank you very much if you sub or donate money, any of those things. And also thank you to everyone else who are on Patreon. Couldn't do that without you. So just to jump it off, Lee Bromley in the chat says, I love Warhammer Weekly. Can I follow up with, I also love Warhammer Weekly? Is that okay?
It's perfectly fine, especially when we're calling you out, as I mentioned we did on the show last night, and that's fine. It was very fun. It was a good discussion last night.
Is your job just to slowly make anyone who even remotely cares about narrative hate me? Is this the mission?
Oh, don't worry. I think they turned on something else that was said in midway because Paul in the midst of the show repeated a statement that Pete Foley made that playing matched play is playing on easy mode or something to that effect is what Pete Foley had said, and that of course sparked a near riot in the middle of the show and of the match play people, and so but it was fine in the end. Of course, it's all a lot of people fighting over butter side up versus butter side down. I remember the Dr. Seuss war or whatever. That's really all it is. Like, yes, we all play the same toy soldier game, so how about we don't worry about stuff like that?
Yeah, I agree. Crazy Horse, thanks for also donating a bunch of subscriptions. Oh, you guys are being real nice today. It's honestly, can I just say a big heartfelt thank you to everyone who has joined me or helped contribute over the past 100 days. I didn't really think that we do 100. I worked out that that's 3 months, and it's felt weird. So, and I've learned a lot over the past 100 days, so I appreciate that. But I want to talk about the subject that we're here today to talk about with Vince, which is kind of open-ended, like I think as a subject. But you and me have talked about this offline, and so we're going to have this conversation out in the world, and that is about the game state of Age of Sigmar at the minute.
Yep.
Do you want to let me know like where you're at, what you think,
Yeah,
where
sure.
we are?
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of people, it's been so quiet broadly on the internet, as it were,
Hmm.
right? Of people discussing what it is. And that's largely because we don't have any stats. We're not all going to tournaments. Most of us, many places in the world, still can't get regular games in, right? And so we've sort of put the broader meta into stasis, as a matter of fact, right? But for those of us who've been watching things like TTS and stuff like that carefully, or who've been playing a lot of TTS games or know people who do, we are entering a bold new world here where the meta doesn't look anything like it used to before we went into this quarantine, this situation. When I say we're going to emerge to something radically different, I mean it's hard for me to understate that. Here's the simplest way I can say it, Rob. Um, we are going to emerge from this meta with a wide swath of armies being competitively dead in the water. I would put their win percentage averaging between 30 and 40%. Like they'll fall out of the fat middle because their entire tactics of how they win will just be dead. It
Hmm.
won't work anymore. And I'm sure we can unpack what I mean by that. But and exactly what armies I think are the ones that are up on the chopping block here. But uh like we are the simplest way to say it is this. Rob, you remember how for so long the running joke was just kill the characters, and I can't do the little, like when I say that I assume you can picture in your head the mix of tiny text and caps,
Hmm.
right? Okay. That's real now. Like
It
that's just real
it is real. It is real. They gave us. So can thanks Azrak for also gifting some gift donations. You guys rule. This is. We also hit a level 5 stream streak. I know that this is terrible for podcast listeners, but it's a really cool thing. Thank you so much. I'll thank you all at the end. Anyway, because I want to get on with the subject. But thank you. Can I just give some context for this for people who might have not listened to either of us before, although I'm sure they'll have listened to you. But let's just talk about competitive Age of Sigmar very quickly. Thanks to the wonderful LLV, over the past few years, we've been able to have stats. Those stats have helped us give some sort of review of power levels of books. And why that's important is because if something is too strong, it becomes a fairly oppressive feeling. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit at tournaments and generally for constructing your army. Because it takes me X amount of time, which is like 14 times longer than Vince, to build and paint an army. If I do that and then in that time period it becomes so underpowered that if I go to a tournament I don't have a skill-based chance to win, or I don't have a very high skill-based chance to win, then I'm getting lost in the reads here in this. But effectively, things can be negative for the general competitive space. Also, if you go and watch other shows I've done, if you compare it to other sports, F1, League of Legends, like there's real-life sports and then there's computer game sports, whichever you prefer, there's normally, like Vince has just talked about, a fat middle. So something doesn't always win. A lot of stuff does generally well, with some stuff being a little bit better and some stuff being a little bit worse. But, we talk about somewhere between 40 and 60% as a win rate being the healthy Age of Sigmar fat middle, and then you get some really tight, good games eventually where they push it like 45-55, although even that's quite hard. So that's the context, really, and what Vince is talking about. And he feels like stuff is now going to... Because we, just before COVID, were in a very comfortable-ish spot, weren't we? I think we weren't.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, I think it was great. There was some stuff that was floating around, like obviously, towards the right before this all broke, we had some kind of Zinch nastiness, and that's still out there. It got somewhat reined in by the change. OBR has some NPE baked into it, but I think it is ultimately a pretty fair army to play against in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. We can, and that's a really important, I'm sure we'll talk NPE at some point in time during this discussion, but you can have an army that has a 45% average win rate and still is full of NPE. Okay. Mm-hmm. NPE is not innately tied to winning. And so this is what I often hear, this is one of the things that actually kind of drives me crazy a little bit, because I'll see very competitive gamers respond to sort of very negative play elements of an army and say, oh, well, you can beat that. It's not unbeatable. Dude, I don't care if it's beatable. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about NPE, I think it actually has almost zero to do with whether it's a winning strat or not, right? It has to do with how much is it going to just piss people off at the table and make them not want to play Warhammer anymore. And actually that can be very distinct from winning and losing, right? I've had tons of fun games where I lost.
Yes,
I've
agreed.
had some really bad games where I won.
Agreed also. Right? Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think that's a key kind of lever that we're trying to pull. I talked about this on Monday's show or another show, I can't remember which. I was watching a dev game update for a phone game called Legends of Runeterra, right? And the devs were like, and I always think of a really good video for the League of Legends devs that they did 3, maybe it might be 5 years ago now, where they were having a conversation with competitive gamers and also casual gamers, but it was an open house. They were the game designers and there were some top streamers, and they were like, we're designing a game that's more fun for everyone. And then the top gamers were like, but we've got to wait longer in queues, and they were like, we don't care. And I was like, right. That's super positive. And the issue that I think that we're really talking about is, I feel like that some of the things that we're seeing in some of the books are a negative play experience, so an NPE, and they don't really add fun to the game. And I think even if you're a competitive gamer, you want the game to be fun. Now, there are some gamers, and again, this is another part of the conversation, who want something to just happen and to be able to stop an opponent just doing something. They want that. They want that level of reliability. But ultimately, actually, that also lowers the skill cap, which is another part of the conversation. And once you lower the skill cap, you really have to justify whether or not it's really even a game. and so you kind of get these like mixture of thoughts that you need to have about it. So yeah, like
Yes. So if you want another good example of this, by the way, Magic recently did an update to its restricted and banned list, like on June 1st. Okay. And if you read the article that announces it, it's a really great article because they talk about how this one deck had started to creep slightly over a 55% win rate, like up to and above a 55, like 55.1% win rate.
mm,
And that told them they had an emergency on their hands and they had to go ban stuff. That's how tightly they try to preserve the fat
yeah,
middle of their thing, right? But I mean, that's what we're talking about right now. Different games have a different tolerance level, right? Certain games will expand it out. I don't think we'll ever have AOS there, but that doesn't matter. I mean, that's just a good example of where they responded to the fat middle, where you can see that little win percentage you're talking about come in as a justification from game designers to make changes, right?
yes. So
So
so so I think the key maybe sticking point for us in your estimation, and also an estimation that I also agree with. I feel like the game has evolved with several of the latest releases. Now, I agree with you that I think Petrifex, while a difficult experience to play against in some situations, has some inherent weaknesses that we might also see followed up in Lumineth. In bodies on the board can kind of be an issue. We obviously haven't seen those in effect. But then we had Safe Starters Book, which is really good, really strong. We've also seen, a 97% probability that Marauders will charge. Always exciting. We've
35 out of 36 times they will land a 9-inch charge. Yes,
yeah,
easy math.
it's easy. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
That's
And then,
without a reroll, I will point out. With a reroll, it goes into the stratosphere. If for
yeah,
any reason they have some kind of reroll, then you can multiply that out by, like, you can square that, and that's what you get. So it becomes an almost impossibility.
yeah, and then we had Zinch, we had One Drop Change Host, which on delivery we were all like, this is an issue, obviously, which I thought we were getting rid of one drops, but obviously the game design seems to have swung back weirdly in another way, which I feel like that's another thing we maybe need to touch on is the frenetic game design. It's just like, have a system, and they're like, yeah, okay, so we're moving away from one drops, the worst one drop in the game. You're like, oh dear, like, this is weird. And then we had KO, and KO could be a fairly negative play experience in the one drop alpha shooting in some cases, but not really. And then we have the Lumineth Realm Lords, which Seraphon. We have Seraphon and the Lumineth, and both of those are they have some and TTS has been dominated by the Seraphon recently.
Sure.
So like what we're I think what I'm saying and what we're saying is that the game has moved on in its power level, and whether or not that's a positive, I think is probably the next topic.
Do you mind if I lay out a theory of the case here?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, let me lay down a theory of the case. Like I'm advancing quite a statement, and I say that I think certain armies are going to. What I actually mean is that a lot of these new armies are going to become very winning because there is a whole set of the meta that they are naturally inclined to be sort of all else equal 70-30 against.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like for their win percentage to go up, somebody else's has to go down, right? That's just how these things work. You're playing somebody to get that win, right? That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what is my theory of the case? Okay. My theory of the case is we'll leave OBR out of this for a second because I actually think they don't factor too heavily into this particular conversation, though they do a little and will more. I'm going to swing back around and touch them at the very end of this, okay? But for the time, I'm just going to push them to the side. Okay.
Yep.
All right. One. So your first suspect here, suspect number one, is Tzeentch. Tzeentch has a ranged dominance largely through magic and oppressive firepower. They can do it through hordes of spells. They can do it through the Lords of Change, who even in the modern meta and in the current spellcasters, I'll talk about the spellcaster meta in a second, are still competitive, right? Because their ability to set dice, to bonus themselves, like they can very easily commonly push out, 8s, 10s, 12s to cast. And they can cause tremendous amounts of mortal wound damage at range. They also have within their bag of tricks things like some minor teleporting here or there, and of course oppressive ranged fire through things like Flamers of Tzeentch, right? Not to mention even just pink horrors. Anybody who's played against Tzeentch in a change host knows that like the Flamers are very big and destructive, But if you forget about the pink horrors, you're silly, because if they all come wheeling in with Neg 1 Rend, you'll be amazed at the destruction they level out as well, right?
Reroll into hit. Thank you, Fate Master.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yes. All with like Neg 1 to be hit back in melee and shooting or something like that, right?
Yeah, in shooting,
Yeah.
definitely. No, combat, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely in combat. And if somebody was clever and took the Neg 1 to hit and shooting, that's actually a pretty interesting matchup. And that's a very interesting thing they can do in the modern meta. Let me just say that. Anyways, okay, that 1. 2, KO. KO's back. There's a lot of question about KO's capabilities, but KO is, regardless of KO's success in the meta, like, can it win 5 games? Can it take top tournaments? That doesn't matter. It's still a gatekeeper. Okay. So Tom came up a couple weekends back, and we played 6 games of Warhammer in 2 days or something like that, right? And he played his KO every time. Different lists, different builds. Here was what was true about all of them. Their ranged power is oppressive. Like, if you haven't played against it, their ability to go, I don't like that thing. Point, click, boom. That thing no longer exists. Okay? That is very much what they can do. Now, does that mean they win the game? No, of course not. That's not how this game works, right? It's not about removing choice pieces. Choice pieces being removed is certainly beneficial generally to your strat, but they can I did not have minor wound characters survive the weekend. That didn't happen, right? Like, if Tom wanted one of my little tiny dudes dead, they were dead, right?
Yep.
Instantly. Okay. And most other heroes too, I might add, by the way, even like monster heroes. Okay, so Suspect 2, KO. 3, Seraphon. Okay. Croak and the Sallies. Croak and the Sally Brigade. Okay, which that's my new 50s doo-wop band, Croak and the Sallies. Dibs on that.
I'm dancing. I want I'm in the crowd dancing to that.
Absolutely.
Like the Blues Brothers. That's what I'll be at the front.
Absolutely. We're on a mission from God. All right, so so Croak and the Sallies. The interesting part about what Croak does is obviously he spits mortal wounds everywhere, right? He spits hot fire. Okay. So he's not only do the salamanders have this impressive amount of like droppable, teleportable, intense firepower, right? That they can just kind of lay down in an area. But also at the same time, you've got Croak over there just kind of spamming mortal wounds, just bubbling them out. And anybody who, again, if you've played against Croak, you know that if you have like 4 or 5 wound characters, like little goblins, little heroes, and 5 wound utility heroes or 6 wound utility heroes, if they live to turn 2, you're pretty happy about that. That's like a pretty big win, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So like they get as deep as those utility pieces get in the game is turn 2, if you're lucky. Okay. Now we're going to introduce Lumineth Realm Lords. Lumineth have we can talk about several different interesting NPs later if you want with them, like their command point thing that is just going to be so ungodly oppressive. But that is like maybe that spell drives me up a wall and back down the other side. But anyway, but they also have Teclis who can just go boom, shake, shake, shake the room and hit basically the entire enemy army with probably either D3 or D6 mortal wounds, right? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people, like, I've had this conversation. Upon reading it, like, my first impression is that's a lot of damage. Everyone's like, oh, I don't think you realise it's only going to be this. And I'm like, I don't think you realise what that is. That's an incredible amount of damage at 36 inches to just do. Like...
Sure. I mean, a single spell will do an average of about, if you want to be completely mathematically average, and say the average army has 10 units, which is pretty true, right? Then that means it does an average of 18 to 20 mortal wounds every time you cast it. Like, that's just math, okay? Because it will hit basically their entire army, and it will do an average of 1.8 or 2 because things have to round up. With spikes, obviously, the chart would look spiky, right? Yep. Because occasionally you're going to get a 5 or 6, and occasionally you're going to get a 1. And that's what would happen. And sure, so like sometimes you'll just get a character just go pop, and it will just blow up because he'll roll the 5 or 6, and then he'll roll a 5 to follow that up, and that character's just dead right there, just boom, dead. Right? Now, is that the modal outcome? No, it is not. Right? And then they'll back it up with shooting mortal wound shooting from their archers, which don't do much else, but they do mortal wounds certainly. Now, what this situation has evolved into. Now I'm going to swing back to OBR. Okay, final mention on OBR. Catapults, my guess is, will become much more popular because catapults were already 5-wound hero killers.
Yes.
Right? Because you could just point a catapult at a 5-wound hero and be like, okay, that thing's dead now. Because you're going to fail one of these saves. So here comes like 6 or shots or 8 shots or something, right? Depending if the Cavalos is around. And fail one and you're dead. Oh, you failed one, you're dead. Right? I mean, you pointed at like big heroes with a 3-up save and watch them take 5 or 10 wounds, right? And so the their catapults will be quite useful, and they still have Nagash, right? They still have like actual Nagash, who is himself part of the new Magic meta. Because I argue what we're going to enter is into this sort of. Do you know what when I say the affinity period of Magic?
No, I don't know. I don't know that period. No.
Okay, so the affinity period of Magic was a very famous dark time in tournaments when everything in the tournament skewed. 80% of the meta was affinity. Okay, like if you went to a tournament, 4 out of 5 players were playing an affinity deck. Period.
Right,
that was the only deck. The other one was playing anti-affinity. Okay, like that was it. Those are your choices. You were either for or against, and against wasn't a very good option. Okay,
good. All right, sweet.
I would argue that what you're going to see is much the same thing evolve with Magic because you've now entered the world of all the supercasters being here and being in relatively playable armies. So Croak, LOCs, Lord of Changes, Nagash, Teclis, right? When it was just like one supercaster, you could kind of dodge him. Like Nagash was this interesting gatekeeper that like, oh, if you kind of went with a middling Magic strat, like I've got 1 or 2 casters and they kind of do a utility thing. I cast like 3 spells, I don't really have any bonuses. Maybe a guy has a +1, but it's useful. It can be part of my strat, right? And you could like dodge Nagash in a tournament and that would be relatively useful, right? Because it was pretty likely that your most opponents you would fight would also just be the same thing. It was just a bunch of like, oh, we roll 2d6 and hope we get some spells. And that's Magic. And when it doesn't work, we all go, oh, Magic's funny. That's not the world now. When you've got these 4 powerhouse armies all bringing mega casters, the world will become either you have mega Magic or you just don't bother. Just leave your casters at home. Like if you're bringing a weird knob shaman, why? Why? That's 120 wasted points. Get that off the table.
I mean, we've also missed out, obviously, the other casters in the realm, which is obviously Halahar, Cities of Sigmar, which also have very potent like spell casting, and because of how it's set up, can also do it at a weirdly odd, like out of unbind range kind of like version of the game as well, which is just not quite as good, and they're not in a singular character most of the time. But I think where some of this like strong magic or anti-magic becomes egregious is the armies that it's inside of, and that it isn't the main thrust of your army. Like, if you have your block of witch elves, they're great in a fight, but that's all they were good at. Like, you didn't have a lot of magical support. And Marathi playing this other key piece, whereas in this situation, Sanesh had the keepers, right? Like it was combat focused, and if you could produce enough shooting to reduce that combat combat effectiveness, you could actually engage in the game. People often didn't, but you could. But in this situation, this is the great casters that destroy your synergy, because it's a game of synergy, versus like with also a great army in front of them. That's the issue, I think.
Yes. So here's my theory of the case. Ready? So, okay, what does that mean? Yeah. That means we have 2 situations that have now become emergent. 1, 5-wound characters are dead. They're dead. Those aren't strats anymore. Okay? Yep. They don't work. Because you will, with 4 to 5 armies that will easily and automatically, and with you all having almost nothing to say about it to stop it. Like there's very little you will be able to do to stop that, right? Because most of these effects are big, board wide, ignoring line of sight, casting over the top of you with numbers you can't match, ranges that you can't hide from, right? Like most of these effects are like that. Okay. Anybody who relies on 4, 5, 6 wound heroes as your strat, that's dead. So that's like Khorne, who relies on utility heroes, some Cities of Sigmar who aren't in Hollowheart or who don't properly like general up like have all their cohorts where they can pass wounds and all that, right? Have their
Hmm.
adjutants and whatnot, their bodyguards. Beast of Chaos, okay, Stormcast, Nurgle, Slanesh, right? Like all of these armies, you're just those guys, they're dead. What are you doing? There's probably more. I made a big list and I'm just reciting off
There
the
are
top of my
more.
head a couple
There are more. Yeah.
that I mentioned. Night Haunt. Night Haunt's another big one. Like forget about that. All your 5 wound ghost heroes, like those guys are dead instantly.
What, Lady Linda won't survive?
Yeah, she's out of here in like a
Yeah.
heartbeat. She's out of here, right?
Yeah.
Um, I would point out, by the way, the Chaos armies, the non-competitive Chaos armies. So I would rank this as Slanesh and Nurgle now. Oh, how the mighty have fallen in Slanesh! Like I can't imagine taking Slanesh into a meta like this. Any of those armies I mentioned would kill most of that Slanesh army top of one, and it's even worse if you run up against Seraphon because Croak's effects are more potent,
Hmm.
right? Like he's even better against you. Um, so the that list of armies, all those people that rely on like I have these careful synergies between blocks of troops and 5 or 6 wound heroes, that's over. Oh, Doc. Doc is the most important. How could I forget Doc? Daughters of Cain. That's done. Because your hag queens, they're all dead. They're all dead.
I mean, I'm not unhappy about that, but if you are a
Sure.
Daughters of Cain player, I can see why you would be.
Like this will finally tip them. They've survived minor nerf and years just running like a good percentage. That's over now because this just blows them up. Their heroes are dead, the cauldron's dead, and now you just got blocks of witch elves who are going to be relatively unbuffed,
Hmm.
and that's dead.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a winner. Um, the so like these are the armies that are going to be, and then second component is mega magic, right? So if you're somebody who relied on minor magic, which many of the forces I just did do, by the way, so like your Nurgle hoping to get off of Blades of Putrefaction, comical, get out of here. Okay, your Doc hoping to get off a their spell, which the name eludes me at the moment because it's very early, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Their rend slash do another damage spell, like comical, get out of here. That's done, right?
Mind Razor.
Mind Razor, thank you.
Mm.
Yes. I was trying to picture it being shouted because that's the only way I can actually hear it said is yelled. And I couldn't get it together in my head. Thank you, Crazy Horse. A hero as always. So the my point is those are two realities, right? And
Hmm.
all those armies that rely on that stuff, that's done. That's my theory of the case. There you go. I've laid it out. I
Okay.
talked too much, Rob.
No, 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 you didn't. You didn't. I think it needed. I think it needed to be said. And I think what the architecture of this conversation is going to be is I don't disagree with Vince at all. And we haven't even had the conversation, which I'll quickly have, is about a negative play experience, which is we go to tournaments almost all the time, or we play games with each other almost all the time to have a laugh. Yeah, whether or not that be to win, we do it to have a laugh, have fun, enjoy ourselves. Games that are negatively impactful, or what are negative play experiences, which started with us talking about these, this conversation as a group or as a community, really evolved from things as early as like gits and netters and being -1 to hit, and then being -2 to hit, and then I'm not getting sports votes at tournaments, and what would that be? It's like, well, actually, if you thought about the construction of your army, like no one wants to play an army where you can't play the way you want to play. You want to play an army where you can, you've got your guys and they're really good at a fight. Well, actually, they're -2 to hit. Now they're terrible in a fight, and it's
Right.
you can't do anything to stop that -2 to hit, right? So that negative play experience that we get, like it impacts us. And there's also the conversation about the production of armies and stuff, and lots of those things. Like for instance, salamanders could be in a corner of the board, yeah. Like right in the corner, I want like an entire army in front of them, and I want to delete. Yeah, I want to delete them. I want to delete them, but I can't. There's nothing I have in my army that can get them. And then in their first turn, they can just go teleport, get out. Are you like, okay, that's pretty awful. Although I do love to picture them like a slan, like mind catapulting them, like it like less of a teleport, more of a throw, which does make me chuckle. So
I mean, like there's a separate discussion here, right? There's sort of two kind of discussions we're having. I think it's important we separate them so we can leave the NPE to the side for a moment and talk just about the tournament itself, because as somebody in the chat mentioned, like a lot of those armies were already on the weekend of the spectrum. Oh, I agree. Right? Like BOC, Beast of Chaos, and Stormcast didn't need help falling farther. Nurgle didn't need help falling farther. But the win percentage for these new armies is going to come from somewhere. And I argue like I'm not like looking into a crystal ball, right? In the old world, when we had in the old meta, say a year and a half ago or whatever, when there was no shooting and really no long range magic and no ability to remove those characters, it was an obvious emergent property that the person who could stack the most synergies into melee blocks into repeatable. There's the reason Doc was good forever, or Slanesh was good forever, right? Because there was no ability to really remove things at range, and so melee was king, and hence the armies that could just beat face hardest would always arrive at the top. And if you had like buffs you could stack that weren't erosive, in other words, like I can buff a unit to high heck and back, send them in, they blender a bunch of stuff and then die, and then I just pick the next unit and do the same thing again, Doc style, right? Um, or FEC, where it's like, I don't care if I die, I'm still going to kill half your army on the way out. I was like Pac-Man through your army.
That's one of the, that to me,
ago,
still is one of the most negative play experiences. Even in like if you were a narrative Flesh Eater Courts player, yeah, like didn't matter, right? And you were just playing Crystal Gore because you're playing with your friends. And this is where I think the conversation between tournaments and playing at home doesn't really factor in. Like there isn't a distinction. I don't make a distinction between the two, because like someone's just like, I'm going to attack twice with a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, and you think, like, what have you done to do that? It's like, I've just turned up. I've just turned up. Yeah, like I've done. Yeah, I'm
you
a
and
kid.
I have a deep-seated hatred of FEC. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Like so, like, and that is impactful. Like now, where it really affects me is that I think the skill cap is lower. Now, skill cap is really important to me, and I'll explain why, is because as much as we have fun at home, as much as it is a narrative game with a narrative setting, and I love that element of it, I see it played, I see people playing with it, I see people producing these beautiful armies. All those things mean the world to me. I also love seeing someone play well. Now, if you reduce the difficulty to play well, like if it's just I just roll dice, like, and it's not quite that, and I don't think it is that. Like for me, that's a personal thing. Now that doesn't have to be how the game goes. The game could be a lot more simple and granular, like not granular, a lot more like 1-2. But I don't think that is also a very engaging game. Now that again is a personal choice, and I think that's actually the feeling of a lot of people, but obviously I'm speaking for a lot of people, and I'm not sure. Like Vince, I don't know if that's your feeling as well. I feel like having lots of options that don't just automatically win the game, but do something towards like a greater total. I want to add like +1, +1, +1, +1, and eventually get to 50, and that wins me the game. Not add +50, win game.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a careful line to walk here. It's interesting, right? I mean, like I found the easy example of this is when I talked to you about how I shelved my Slanesh. I mean, this became a thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it just wasn't fun to play anymore. Because it just felt like yes, there's play to it. Like you had to be somewhat intelligent about how you use your pieces. But if you used your pieces with even a modicum of intelligence, you just removed enemy armies, right?
Yeah.
And then summoned in your second version of your army. Like, yay, this is a good time. No, it wasn't. I put the army on the shelf. Like I wasn't feeling that sense, right? That you're talking about.
Yeah. So I'll go on after you.
Yeah. No, so I was going to say, I think that's right. I think you have to be careful of that. There are some things, and this isn't cogent to our conversation, but just to tie it off, there are some things in LRL that are that have nothing to do with its power level that I'm just like, I don't like that game. I don't like that game element's design at all. It's extremely complex and makes LRL not at all a newbie friendly army. It's a very high skill floor army. So different discussion.
So I'm gonna because what me and Vince are effectively doing are framing the argument or the problem, if you will, and then we're going to move on to solutions or conversations about solutions in a moment.
Yeah.
I would just like to bring in one other element very quickly, because I feel like it's really, really important in framing the conversation, is what happened in 40k at the beginning of the year, well, October to the beginning of the year, and with the army Iron Hands. So my good friends at the 40k Stat Center, if you go and listen to their conversations about how effective Iron Hands were at the game, they would win, at one point there were 17 GTs in one weekend, and 16 of them were won by Iron Hands.
Right.
This is that's it was bonkers. They were riding an 80% win rate, and then they got nerfed, and then they were down to a 70% win rate, which is still crazy. That's 10% over our fat middle. And if it wasn't them, it was some other version of Marine, effectively.
Right.
And the reason that I bring this up, even though obviously it's not talking about Age of Sigmar, is because the 40k community decided to the 40k community decided to do something about it. Like specifically some of the Dave Fraser, thanks for donating some money to the show. Thanks, Dave, babe. Anyway, Angel. The reason that I bring that up is because the 40k community actively decided to do something about it. But that was a community that had to live with an army being at an 80% win rate for about 2 months.
Sure.
Like, think about that. That's every tournament you could attend in a 2-month period. And then over 6 months, Marines were on a, 60 to 70% win rate. So effectively, it was like what you described in that Magic meta, where it was just the thing and then the anti-thing.
Yep.
Right?
So let me, I know where you're going with this, and let me make a quick point, though, of a distinction. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. The situation, because it's not completely analogous. Mm-hmm. The situation you're describing is what happens when you've got one winner and everybody else loses. Now, again, when we talk about all this stuff, even though we're often talking in terms of hyperbole, like we are talking about percentages. Yes, very good players can overcome. Yes, it's not 100%. We're always, like you mentioned, even at the best, it was like 80%, and some of that's mirror matches and blah, 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 blah. I'm aware of all the nuance. We're skipping it so this discussion doesn't take 6 hours, okay?
Yep.
So please don't actually me and push your glasses up. We got it. Okay. So, and your local meta might be very different, and you might never play these forces, and you might never experience this, and that's all super cool, and I'm happy for that, and that's probably how by the way, my club plays, because I don't have anybody who plays most of this broken stuff anyways. So, excellent. Okay. The situation you're describing is where there's one winner and a lot of losers. And you know what the answer is in that situation? It's easy. You get out the guillotine. Okay? When the king alone is the problem, it's easy to solve, because you get out the guillotine and you storm the castle and you chop off the head of the king. Mm-hmm. And problem solved. Okay? But that's not what we're talking about in AOS. That was the Iron Hands problem. All we needed to do was chop off the head of the king. Okay? In AOS, the problem is what happens when you have a sort of more modern American economy where you have a very vast distinction between the haves and the have-nots. Okay,
Vince, are you a member of Antifa? B, suggesting the proletariat rise up and take over and behead the king? Are you a French revolutionary? Is this what I'm experiencing right now?
Definitely a French revolutionary. Yes, and my leadership will undoubtedly lead to the terror, no doubt about it. It will not be a pleasant utopia on the other side of the revolution. So, no, the problem is what happens when it's not one. Because what have we just described? Like, we've got a set of armies that are still going to do fine and are still going to be relatively competitive. So everything I just mentioned, Tzeentch, Seraphon, probably LRL, that's all Theory Hammer at this point. But I do believe they'll fall in there, right? OBR, KO. We didn't mention them yet, but they're going to skate through again and be really good in this modern meta, and that's IDK. Like, assuming their eels don't get nerfed real hard in the GHB. They'll once again be ready to go. Like, they're highly resistant to everything we've just talked about. They've got a good strat. They've got good responses to a lot of this. Like, IDK continues to just weave through the Aether Sea of the meta, always just coming out on top. So there's probably like 5, 6, maybe 7 armies that are going to be in that space. Slaves to Darkness, probably somewhere in there toward the bottom, but in there, right? Through things like either the Legion of Chaos Ascendant or some other, derivative of therein, or just on the back of the overwhelming power of Broken Marauders. But then you've got this, so that's like 7 that are up there at the top. And then you'll have like 19 that all get kind of really pushed down. And what we get is an inverted fat middle, right? What we want is the fat middle where what do we have right now? 26 armies or something? What's Luminous about to be? The 26th or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so let's just say it's that number. I don't know if it's that number or not, but it's somewhere around there. So what you want is like 24 of those falling in the fat middle and like 1 or 2 accidentally being outside at all points in times that just kind of need to get reined in and fixed, right? That's pretty healthy. We're going to have the opposite of that. We're going to have 7 that are pushing either like 60% or above, right? That are at that level where they run like 57 to 73 probably. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have like 19 or whatever the remainder number is being at less than 50 and being with many of them falling below 40. Yes. Right. And how you fix that is a lot more difficult, right? Because you can't just chop off the head of the king.
And and this is where, before we get to the solution element, now last bit is where in Magic, as you much discussed. Marcus, thanks for donating some bucks, you babe. Angel. So where it's throwing me off. Where we saw Magic the Gathering, or Wizards of the Coast specifically, be like, oh, there's a bit of a problem here. Let's deal with this. Yeah, is we're also dealing with our game designers. Our game designers didn't nerf DOK last 2 winter FAQs ago. You know, they happily release the Rat Trap. You know, there are a bunch of things which either they take 6 months to a year to 2 years to fix. Okay, and that's our fact so far. We could hope for a better. I already hope for a better. I already hope. Yeah, that's already. But I'm going off the experiences I've had and what's happened in the game. So they take a while. They also have a group of not only as a company but also as a group of people who have more kind of. I'm trying to word this in the right way. There is a general pushback sometimes on some of these pieces of evidence being useful, and that is because it doesn't fit the narrative that the game is exactly how they want it to be. The idea that these things aren't strong, we just don't understand because we're peasants and plebs, is obviously a little rude. Like that's one. And also, what it does is it takes out any agency for all of the people who play them. Like all of the people who are like, Slaanesh is awful to play against. Look at their 75% win rate. I don't like it. It's not fun. You're invalidating my army. And then people will push back and go, actually, you're talking shit. It's like, and that it doesn't come directly from the company, but it comes from enough people affiliated with the company or supported by the company that it's a difficult conversation to have as a community because, and this, Vince, is, I don't want to make this last too long before we get to the solution. This is interesting based on how Age of Sigmar started. Age of Sigmar started with us all having conversations with each other and being like, this is too much. Yeah? Like, that's how we started out. That's what Age of Sigmar started out. They were like, no points. Like, we'll do some points. We'll comp it ourselves. We'll be part of the conversation. Age of Sigmar is the most, like, together group of people, I think, as a gaming. Well, I feel like that. I feel like we're like, nah, mate, that's a bit too far. You know, even you're like, I'm going to shelve this army. This is too much.
Yeah.
So, go on, after you.
No, I agree completely. I mean, especially for those who were around since the early years, there's a strong sense of community, and it's only continued to grow as new people came into it because we all were in it together, right? When you're on when you're all in the foxhole together or in the trench together, there's a bond that forms, right? And that's what happened. And as new people showed up, we welcomed them into the trench with us. Like, hey, come on in. You know, it's a great community here, and we're all tight, and we've all agreed to take sort of responsibility for each other. So I do agree with that. Now, you know, the solution, and I see where you're wheeling. I see where you're pointing your arrow. I see what you're about to get out of your quiver. Rob.
I was gentle about it because what I want to do is focus on positives. I want to frame the conversation, which I think you've done eloquently as always, and I could listen to you forever. And now move on to what do we do? Like, what do we do as a community? How do we talk? What's our conversation points? You know, what can we do actively? We've talked about shelving armies, but obviously if there's 4 or 5 armies, like, so learn to play better. Great conversation, but a little useless because really what we're saying is some of those elements you can't play better against. They just do better things.
They just have an outright win strat. You know, they just have a hard counter to you. It's rock, paper, scissors in sort of the worst version of that, right? Like not a soft rock, paper, scissors where like, oh, okay, what you want ideally in a perfect meta is a soft rock, paper, scissors, where when I show up, your rock is like maybe 60% against my 40% win rate of scissors, right? So, okay, like I've got to play better to win this. That's a soft rock, paper, scissors. Hard rock, paper, scissors is my strat just doesn't work anymore. I relied on synergies from 5 wound heroes and soft magic by regular casters to win. That's a dead strat.
Or I relied on spending 1 command point in the first turn.
Sure. Oh,
like oh my god.
Again, I like that spell. I just is a whole that I could do an hour show on that spell and why it's bad. So we can tee that up for some later stream streak day if you want. But where you're pointing is like community comp, I think, is what you're
No,
pointing at.
so well, okay. Let me talk. Let me. So yeah, if you guys aren't au fait with the term comp before, effectively it means someone, and it has existed in many versions of Warhammer before. Someone somewhere in the world goes, these are problems, and then I mean it was incredibly complicated 8th edition version. Now I have always been actively against comp. I want you to know that. I feel the fact that we're all playing the same game all around the world, like the reason that I'll talk about things that are negative, or I'll take the piss online, or I'll do some hot takes, which causes Vince to call me a terrorist. Any of those things is to get the conversation started, so that there's enough vocal pressure from us as a community to make Games Workshop do about it. I would always like and always want Games Workshop to take the lead because I don't want to take the lead. Yeah, I always want them. I want them to get better design, not get better designers. That's unfair. Like I would like to improve, have more dev. I mean, the company's made a shit ton of money over the past few years. Hire more people to do that work has always been.
Well,
my
yes, like
argument.
just real quick, I'll jump in on that. Like the number one fix needs to be, and I've said this for years, and I'll continue to say this until the position exists, and somebody emails me that it exists and says, "Hi, I'm this new person," and then I'll shut up. But they need to institute a formal developer. Right, like if you look at how even like D&D is designed or Magic is designed, they have very different formal roles, hard separated roles where you have a formal developer. It's not a designer. It's not somebody who ever writes rules. Your job as a developer is not to write rules. It's to erase rules. It's to rein things in. It's to balance things out. It's a very important role. Even when I've written books in the past, I always had Tom playing the role of my formal developer, so I was design. You don't want your designers to be fettered. Designers should be unfettered. They should be writing crazy stuff. I mean, like bonkers stuff.
Yes.
They should be writing whatever their heart desires, whatever they think suits the story the best. And then there should be a separate person who they then hand over the manuscript to, and the developer, excuse me, says, okay, this is out of bounds. Bring this back in. This doesn't work. Here's how we fix it. And that's their only role. Their job is fixing, right? They're the accountant of the situation. It's not. And by the way, that can't be playtesters. They don't have the experience, time, or wherewithal to do that. And that's not a slam on playtesters, by the way. It's just an incorrect attribution of their role. Their UAT. UAT is super important. It has to happen. And that's the role of playtesters. This is formal QA. I mean, if you've ever developed software or been a part of a software development team, you have developers, you have QA. This is really easy, folks. And then you have UAT eventually before you roll the code out. It's not hard. This is stuff that's been solved for like 50 years as to how you develop. And by the way, making a game is just making manual software.
Yes. Also, the other, when you do anything, you show someone and you go, "Tell me this," because you're too close to the subject. You're too close to the subject. Like, and there is obviously and has been in the business world and in any sort of thing development for a long time in these fields. So Vince has explained that better than I. But it's just too close. Just get some developers and just use all your money. If I have more fun, I'll buy more things. That's an obvious thing, and that's also true 100%. For all of you as well. My point was about comp is I would never argue for it. As much as I know that doesn't give you something to argue against, I know. But at the same time, some people are asking what UAT is in the chat.
Oh, user acceptance testing. Go ahead.
Okay, there you go. For me, I feel like, and this is shout out to all my narrative gamers, like what I feel like would be a positive could be community suggested, like, I mean, it's comp, but I would not use that word because it's too emotionally loaded, right? It would be community produced, like suggestions. And it's simple as that. And the goal would be, and this is really important, the goal would be not to balance the game. The goal would be to make the game more actively fun and interesting for everyone who could be playing with any army. So that would be, and that is, like you said, is cutting the heads off the snakes as opposed to remolding all the snakes into the image that we envisioned, if that makes sense.
It does.
But that would be the only thought. And number one, this is really important, I would never want to do it. because that's a lot of hassle. Yeah, and fuck you all. I don't want to do it for you. Like I'm telling you, it's wrong. Yeah, if you're like happy to just have like some salamanders take you off the board, like speak up more. Do you know what I mean? I hate being at the head of a the head of a charge. Go over the wall. After you. So what do you think?
Okay. So I think this is a very difficult problem to tackle because it's endemic of the base reality right now. Like it is an emergent property. It's not a single rule we can tamp down. It's not a single thing or point we can adjust, right? Like if we lived in a world where the out of bounds thing was eels, let's just imagine it was only eels. None of this other crap we talked about was a thing, right? Well, then the answer's simple. You just fix eels. Okay, great. Now, Rob, did you ever watch the show Community?
I've watched like a season.
It's a really great show. You should watch it. It's all on Netflix and Hulu now. What are you doing with your life? Did you ever watch the timeline episode?
I just watch repeats of Letterkenny all day long.
Really fair. Did you ever watch the timeline episode where they roll a die and the darkest timeline gets created?
No, but I have seen an episode of that on Dear White People the other day, which was fun.
Very good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the darkest timeline. Okay? This is an emergent property of the meta. It's going to show up. It's going to kill these armies. When people all start playing again regularly and in large ways, they're going to feel it. There's going to be a huge swath of armies that are going to feel what I've just talked about. Okay? And that's going to be happening as theoretically it's possible that we would go into like AOS 3.0 next year. Could be, could be not. Who knows? Okay? I don't know when they're planning to evolve it. Right? The natural response to this is to then shift the ground of the base game rules. What I mean is, okay, well, 5 wound heroes are dying too easy. Okay, great. Well, we'll just let them join units or something. Or bodyguard off of nearby units. We'll beef up Lookout Sir. Because Lookout Sir is not doing enough against, most of this stuff. That's neat against shooting attacks. Only one of those things I mentioned does. And by the way, they compensate for it. +1 to hit. It doesn't do anything against all of the mortal wound spam. So now we'll start, well, what if we just let characters join units in some way? What if we just, and then we'll keep adding on these rules. The darkest timeline, Rob, is that now that we've finally gotten out of that we keep building rules to patch the problem we have. And we're going to end up back looking like the footing of 8th edition. That's the darkest timeline this spins out. Right? Where you have rule after rule after rule we've laid down to try to compensate for this situation and hold everything in balance. And now the House of Cards has gotten too big and too complicated, and our only answer is to burn it all down and start again, right? That's that's the darkest timeline. I'm not saying I think that'll happen. I'm saying that's certainly possible because this fever pitch of complaint of how come my army just doesn't work, right, is going to be happening there. Now, how can we solve this in the meantime? Well, hopefully the GHB tackles a little bit of it. Step 1, let's take Croak and make him a heck of a lot more expensive. Like a lot more. Like stupid more. Okay?
I feel like this is 3 years ago, but sure. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry, he's way underpriced. And I've seen the argument of like, yeah, but you've got to take a Astral Bearer and you've got to take all these things.
There's no argument.
Get out of here. It's worth 700 points if he kills half the enemy army and makes you win the game just by if he can single-handedly take 7 armies out of existence just from even playing, then it seems like it's worth 700 points. So just get out of here with that. Okay, 1. So that's gone. Right? So we get Croak up, we get the Sallies up. Zinch can probably use some more points adjustments, right, on things like on some of their stuff. Like take Change Host and make it exorbitantly more expensive. Like just 1 drop should be exorbitantly expensive, by the by. Like that just feels like a pretty nice rule to have, right? Like just if you want to pay for the 1 drop, you're going to lose a big part of your army. Point of fact, I used to 1 drop with my Iron Jaws back in the day. You know how much I paid for that, Rob, in battalions?
360?
Well, it was 300 points at that time, or 300 to 320 in 2 different times. But yes, good point. You're exactly on. Yeah, I was willing to pay 300 points to get that 1 drop. Maybe they should be as well. Maybe that's the bar. You want to 1 drop your whole army? It's 300 points. Yep. That's how much it costs.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, the 1 drop is so useful. Being able to control that first turn. Like, I wouldn't hate. I like the list construction, designing a list and understanding how many drops it is to play the game. But I wouldn't hate the game where I would not hate the game at all, and I think it changes the game. instinctively, like, for the better if you just make it that you get +1 if you finish deploying before your opponent, and then you roll off. You deploy better, you have to deploy smarter, you can't guarantee you're going to do all these things on the first turn. There's so much more to it as a game. It's far more interactive, and you cannot set up knowing you're going to win. Like, there's less I will, and there's more risk versus reward, which I always think is a better game and a more enticing experience. So, like, yeah, like I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah, after you.
Yeah. So I think that's a good solution there. You know, we can fix Zinch largely with points, so that's helpful. You know, so there's Seraphon fixed, there's Zinch fixed. OBR I don't think is actually problematic for the most part. Things like their catapults are ultimately pretty fair because once you charge them, they can't fight anymore. You know, they still need to fix Petrifex Elite so the army's more interesting across the board. So just like make a minor change to Petrifex, and then we can all and then OBR can just be a normal army and everybody can be happy with them and they're fine and dandy and life goes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
KO, they always have a hard counter. They're always what they are. They should be a gatekeeper, but if they alone are having to rely on like actual shooting to kill your stuff, it's not as bad anymore. How we deal with Techless and LRL, I'm not prepared to say what the changes for them are at this point in time. Because like they haven't even hit the table yet. It seems really premature to say fix them in some way, but like there could be things you end up doing and through either scroll changes or points changes down the line with certain elements of it. Like ultimately, I'd love to see certain things change about that army that we're talking about. But again, let's let them play out a little bit before we get on to changing them. But I think if you work in it, my point here is you got to be aggressive. Be aggressive. It's time to get out your inner high school cheerleader and be aggressive, right? Because this problem isn't going to solve itself. It's just not.
No.
And if you whack all of those things in turn and go, all of you are going to produce a negative meta that makes something like a dozen armies relatively unplayable, relatively based on what we talked about earlier. So we're going to hit you pretty hard. And then at the same time, you do a little to add back into those other armies, right? Maybe some of those get a new book, like Nurgle, you know, the rumored new Nurgle book or whatever. Mm-hmm. Then you can also correct in some of their deficiencies and give them other interesting strats that they can follow, and we can slowly pull that curve back. You know, new Stormcast, get a new book, something like that, right? So these things can be adjusted, but you've got to be aware of it and actually address it.
It's also like as discussed before. It takes time. I'd just like to, if you don't mind, just touch on Archie's point, because I feel like some people will be listening and they'll be like, "Dude, no one's ever played a game with Lumineth, and the only games you've played with Seraphon have been in TTS because of the global lockdown, right?" Like so, like listen. I've been doing this now. Vince has been doing this even longer than I, but I've been doing this professionally and traveling the world, going to tournaments to review stuff. So. Like, you don't have to take my word as solid, and I've been wrong before.
Yeah, Rob called crematorians as a good strat. What the hell does he know?
That's still a fun one. Like, I know double Gothazar, that works. That's fine, right?
Sure.
But
that was real.
That was real. But the point is that it doesn't. I don't think it requires much to be able to understand what this does. Like, if you were to ask me, Rob, this unit does D3 mortal wounds at 6 inches, I'll be like, okay, well, like, can you teleport it, like, within 6? Like, when does it do it? Is it at the end of the combat phase? I'm like, okay, there's loads of interesting things. I can start to talk to you about things that are relevant. Like, the Croaknado, so calling the Technado, the Croaknado isn't even new. We had a version of that in the past. Croak used to be able to do board-wide mortal wounds. It was nerfed into oblivion eventually. He was ridiculous amount of points. Mr. Darren Watson, like 3 or 4 years ago, was running that. Also, FYI, putting his Chameleon Skinks on the base of his Balewind Vortex, which offended me to no end, but was within the parameters of the rules. So these things have already existed. I've already experienced them, and also I've already seen them at competitive play and analysed them for a while. So just to discuss them, even like at book read, doesn't mean, and you know, if you listen to the deep dives that I've done about Lumineth, like they're light on bodies. They suffer to generate CP. They're going to struggle in the battle shot phase. You know, I've highlighted the weaknesses as well as the strengths. What we're talking about is the strengths are much stronger than other things that we've seen, and also mean the other armies can't play the game, and that's really relevant for a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how does Lumineth ultimately shape up? They could be at the bottom of that pile I just talked about in actual win percentage, right? They might not end up being the ones. Like, we can have this fight where all these 5 top armies are all fighting for 60 to 70% win ratios, and maybe LRL ends up at like bottom of that. I think they will be strong. I think you're right. They have a bodies challenge, but I think ultimately they have quite a set of tools at their disposal to really, really inhibit armies. What we're ultimately talking about is not just that. It's not how they play against the winners, but how they actually punish. All of these armies actually punish existing losers worse. That's what scares me. It's not like this thing showed up and it's like, oh, that's great. That'll kind of be a nice, healthy counter to this other thing in the meta. That's actually kind of what happened when KO showed up with something like OBR, right? You're like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. KO actually makes a nice little counter to OBR. OBR doesn't tend to have a lot of great defenses against that kind of ranged firepower, right? So that neat. Those both kind of play against each other well. That's kind of a cool, soft rock, paper, scissors, right? OBR was really good. KO shows up. That's kind of a good matchup for them. Thumbs up. I like that kind of stuff happening. Not where it's like overwhelming. I don't want releases to fix the meta, but I think it's interesting when the play kind of goes back and forth like that, right? It's different, though, if it shows up and it's like, I don't need another bodybuilder showing up who's really good at beating up toddlers. Like, that's all we're getting.
That's true. It's true. And the question as to whether or not it beats up the other bodybuilders is irrelevant because we're not having that conversation. We're having the conversation about like what about the toddlers? And
exactly. The 4 or 5 bodybuilders, they're all just going to get into a greased up, like muscle bound, just meat clacking slap fight later. Okay, and it's going to be. It's going to be as hot as you imagine. But
also available on Nathan Prescott's OnlyFans if anyone's interested.
Sure.
But that's
I'm worried about them being turned loose on the playground and just kicking around grade schoolers, right? That's what we're talking about here, right?
So what's your process for like solution? We talked about obviously GHB. We hope the company, what they do is they analyze the information and they process and affect change. Do you care? Like I know you care, Vince. I know you care a lot. What I more mean is how much does everyone else? We all get personal responsibility for how we feel and interact with the game, right? So we already take that. So whether or not I take something super strong, whether or not I take something weak, it's my responsibility to do so. And I understand the game state either loads or a little bit depending on how much work I do. But what about everyone else? Like, do I have, as a player or as a TO, any personal responsibility to everyone else turning up? The game company obviously have a personal responsibility to make sure we have fun, because then we'll play more. But they don't have to. I think people will buy Warhammer when it's atrocious, and there's been examples of that for years. So, like that isn't the point. What I'm saying to you are you interested enough in for everyone else in what's your process for trying to deal with it is what I'm asking.
Well, one, I think you have to wait until the GHB and I know that as Crazy Horse mentioned, like the GHB was printed months ago. Well, that's probably true. The little points sliver thing can be printed later. That's why they print them as 2 separate books so they can actually send away all the complicated stuff for the GHB to get it printed earlier, and then they can run the printing for the points thing later. That's why they do them as 2 separate books now, right? So hopefully that's there. And we'll address some of this. 2, don't hold back. You can use the GHB's release as a occasion to do a big summer FAQ, right? Like, I would be happy with that. Put it out. Update the War Scrolls in the app. Make the changes. Make the changes. Be aggressive, right? That's what I would ask. And so I don't know what the solution is until I see what they're actually willing to do, right? Now, if they take the right moves, if they're aggressive, because they can put together a PDF and publish it out there as an FAQ, they can start that today and get it published whenever the GHB comes out, right? That doesn't have the lead time. You're not sending that off to printers. You're not waiting for a slow boat from China, as it were, right? Now the Mr. Belvedere theme song's in my head, but that's okay. We'll keep going. The point is that there are tools they have in their toolbox to address this, right? And again, I'm not saying anything about LRL yet. I want to see how it actually plays. I see LRL has a lot of red flags. Red flags don't necessarily mean anything, but there's a lot of red flags popping up. Okay? Maybe everything works out. Maybe I'm completely wrong. As Rob called crematorians, I thought Boeing bounders were too powerful and were going to be adjusted. We've all been wrong. We've all been
I
wrong.
would like you, before you keep quoting me on that, I would like to say this was before the Gothazar nerf, where this is when you could just get infinite Mortec and explode them on mortal wounds, was, I thought, better than just saving stuff. Because if I could save stuff and do damage, which Petrifex is just save stuff, so much more boring. So, context.
Context.
Yeah.
My point is we've both been wrong. But do you want me to go find a different example? I can find one. That's
no. Oh, I know you can find more. I just want to give context to that specific one. Don't worry.
Sure.
Yeah,
but I think you're right. We both see these red flags. Now, the answer is, what happens if GHP doesn't fix it? Right. Well, that depends on when the meta actually roars back to life. Australia and New Zealand are going to be the first. They're going to be the canary in the coal mine here, right? Because they've actually handled this situation rather well, this global pandemic. And they're returning to tournaments here within the weeks, right? So in July and August, we're going to see plenty of tournament results coming out of Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
And
also, you could go and check some of that already from this weekend. Big shout out to the Failed Charge, who just did a stream of a tournament this weekend. So I just thought I'd mention that.
That's what I meant to do. I meant to go get my Failed Charge hat and put it on. I forgot it this morning. Darn it. Darn it. I thought of that last night and then forgot. Anyways. And, so we'll see a lot more results. There'll still be some tournaments happening in America because, YOLO over here on this side of the pond is all I got to say. And so, there'll be some, like probably NashCon will still happen. We'll see. I hope so. Fingers crossed. And but Australia, New Zealand will be the real canary. And it'll be interesting to watch those stats start accumulating again. Right. And if this is emergent and part of the problem is we're not going to actually know what the heck the Luminous army looks like for like 3 months. Like, we're talking about this, but nobody can play this army.
Well, see, that's where I think the TTS environment is actually like a huge. I already know people that have racked up 10, 15 games,
Sure.
And there's some solid feedback about that. And actually, I feel that is where, again, playtesting and those other elements, like, they give us some sort of indication about the world is. But I agree with you. So currently, we're more, let's wait for the GHP is our solution. Let's see what that is, and let's return to this conversation post GHP.
Yep, I think that's right. And by the way, if nothing's done and we don't see new books on the horizon for some of those things, which, by the way, fundamentally, they're just naturally weak. My problem is a new book in this meta where that stuff hasn't been corrected can't solve the problem. You're just throwing more chum in front of sharks. Mm-hmm. Because unless you take extremely aggressive measures where suddenly every book has some weird bodyguard mechanic for no reason, or every book has overwhelming amounts of mortal wound saves for no reason. Right, and then we're just piling problems on top of problems.
But are we?
Right?
So one of the biggest conversations about comp, is every maybe we should do comp. You're just moving the goalposts, okay? Doesn't the solution that isn't an elegant solution just move the goalposts? Like an army that just saves, just has mortal wounds that saves everything. It's like, okay, that moves the goalpost because of the 26 armies. Let's say that's the number. Yeah, it helps one. The worst thing you could ever say to me is I don't know how you would beat this, and someone goes, have you thought about eels? And I'm like, you don't just keep saying to me, have you thought about eels every time, because it's a dumb army that wins on turn 3, right? It's more.
It is a winning strat.
Yeah, it's a winning strat, but it's not engaging, is it? And I don't think it keeps the game. I don't think it keeps the game honest. I don't think that's what eels do. And I also think I think LRL are actually really good into eels personally. But anyway, it'll
be an interesting matchup. Yeah. So I mean, my thought is, yes, at that time, if it's not there, I think the answer is. Do you know what I think the answer is, Rob?
What is it?
Let's say nothing gets fixed in the GHB. Do you know what I think ultimately the right answer is?
This is what I'd like to hear. Yeah.
So, did you ever have braces? Or
No.
are you a person blessed with good teeth?
Also, no.
Okay, got it. Well, I had braces when I was very young, and because my teeth were just awful, awful, awful teeth. Yeah. And so every day, and when you have braces, old style braces especially, this is before these newfangled Invisalign and stuff like that. I had old school metal strapped in, glued to your teeth, and you got to go in every couple weeks, and somebody takes a set of pliers and turns a screw to
Oh,
tighten them. Okay, and you can just feel your whole jaw going and clenching together. It's very uncomfortable and not a positive experience. As I would sit there in the dentist chair or orthodontist chair, sorry, I would look up at the wall, and on the wall there was a little tiny teddy bear, and he was hanging off of a little rope, and he had a little big smile, and in his smile he had little braces, and under the teddy bear it said "Grin and bear it," right? And that was their solution. Like that was it. That's your option. This is gonna hurt. Get ready. Like that's all you can do. Grin and bear it. My answer is yeah, we'll have to grin and bear it. I don't think there's because it's such a diffuse problem of the underlying substructure of the game.
hmm
My answer is we will just have to grin and bear it until it changes again.
okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. So, don't try to. Okay, that's interesting. Because interestingly, that is what like not the lead. I don't want to say the lead of the 40k community, but some elements of the 40k community didn't do at the beginning of the year. Like there was such an active negative response to an oppressively competent army that they took the lead and said that we're going to ban this unless Games Workshop do something about it. Games Workshop then went and did something about it. Now, that group of people also are like playtesters and quite closely connected with Games Workshop in being frontline gaming. So they may already have known ahead of time, so they might have just been pulling a political move, yeah, to gain some credibility, yeah, having already known. So that's where they're at. I'll leave that for you guys. But the it's an interesting response. Is just leave it. I think because I know for a fact that one of
It's
the
not
things
a
that
happy
you've
response.
well, I know that one of the things that you've done actually is you've challenged the status quo of the game because you for NashCon helped develop better secondaries.
Yes, sure.
So
And stuff like that can help. And again, I think ultimately the reason I say grin and bear it is because it's going to be the tournament player's burden, as it were,
mhm,
right? Because in your local meta, everything we just talked about might not be the case. Let's say your local meta is somebody playing Corn and somebody playing BOC and a person playing Nurgle, and you've got an Eel player out there, you got an IDK player, and that's basically the groups you play with. You know how much you're going to feel anything we just talked about? Pretty much zero,
it's true.
right? What do you care? Who cares if this is off kilter? You're not going to experience it. And if it's in your local meta and there's one person and they're playing and there's one, let's do take the same meta, but you got one Seraphon player and they've been bringing Croak and Sallies, and Croak and the Sallies don't get fixed. They're still doo-wop in their way, mortal wounding the whole battlefield apart, right? Then the
Yep.
answer is obvious. You know how you comp that? It's real simple. The four of you go to your one friend and go, hey, stop it. What are you doing? This isn't what we're playing, man. I'm over here with Corn. He's got Nurgle. You've killed us 10 out of the last 10 games. We get it. You can win with this list. What more do you need to prove? Bring something different. Okay? Like you got a bunch of lizards. Bring a coalesced army without Croak and just let's have a fun game.
hmm
Right? Like it will solve itself at that micro level and everybody will still be happy. It will be the tournament where you just see certain armies stop showing up. And by the way, at the tournaments, those players will all filter down to the low tables and they'll probably have a fine time too. It'll just be a reality
Well,
because
no,
it'll be the Corn
you
versus the
can't,
BOC
no,
player
you
down on
can't.
table 54.
Nah, you can't forget the mirror match because that's not true. Because it's not like every single one of the Seraphon lists makes it to turn 4-5. Sometimes they play a mirror. Sometimes, I mean,
Oh,
they
sure. Sure.
like
No, I mean like the majority, not all. What
okay.
I'm saying is like what will be the modal outcome for most of those armies is they will naturally filter to the bottom tables.
hmm
Right?
Yeah. Also, Gitley has got a great question. What if 90% of your local meta, because he's based in London, is utter hyper efficient competitive armies?
Sure.
like,
So you're playing South London Legion style where everybody's bringing filth. Nico and
yeah,
the boys.
yeah. You just got
Uh
to deal with it. I think is the
then
unfortunate answer.
you've got two options. One, well, I mean, when everybody has a gun, don't bring a knife to the fight. That's number
Mhm.
one. But so that's an important rule. Or two, I don't know. London real estate's pretty expensive. I guess you could look for other places around England to move. That would be an option too. Uh,
Listen,
take an
Vince,
extreme example.
I know that your time is precious, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. I love that your the the culmination of your points is just to bite the pillow, and just take it like a champ,
Close your eyes and think of the queen, yes, or whatever. Yeah.
which is interesting. So thank you for being on the show and talk to me about it. And I would love to come back to this post GHB and revisit this chat at that point, because I think there'd be a lot to talk through there, right?
Absolutely. I think there's going to be so much to talk about. Like, we are going to emerge from this hibernation, from this cave, into a just completely different world. It's going to be like the original ending of Army of Darkness before they changed it, where Ash comes out of the cave and he slept too long and the whole world is post-apocalyptic, right? It's going to look totally different. The landscape has changed. And I think it's going to be really surprising to some people who haven't gotten games in, or who haven't been seeing what's going on in TTS or whatever, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. Any shout outs you want to make? Obviously, you can obviously find Vince on Vince Venturella's, which I'll include in the show notes to know what YouTube channel. But you can also just search for Warhammer Weekly, and you'll find Vince and Tom, the wonderful Tom, also.
We had literally the opposite of this discussion last night on the show. So it's like, if you want to go the complete opposite direction where we were talking purely about narrative, this is like the farthest away from this discussion. That was last night's show. So yeah. There you go.
Any shout outs you want to make, though? That's the real point.
Hey, Rob, thank you for doing this every day, buddy. It's been great to always have this. And sometimes you talk about 40K stuff, and I even watch that because I like your 40K people. That is the biggest compliment I could possibly give to you. You made me watch a piece of 40K content. When you're doing it, it's worth it. So there you go.
Oh, no, I appreciate that loads. I also want to say a big thank you to Lee Bromley, Crazy Horse, everyone who's subscribed, whoever you might have been, or gift donations or financial donations on the show today. You guys have all been wonderful. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me for 100 days as well. I've learned loads of valuable lessons, so I appreciate it for supporting me. And I hope it's helped support you, because we've all been locked in. I know there's been guys locked in houses, their family, they need an hour off a day, whatever it might be. So I hope it's been valuable to you. I am continuing because the lockdown's kind of over in England. I know it's definitely over in the US, but like
I'm still avoiding leaving my house as much as possible, especially given the situation here in the US. Let me just say that.
Yeah, same. But it's been a pleasure having you all. So thank you. So I'm going to continue. So join me tomorrow. I'm already prepped for that. It's going to be fun. Thank you to everyone on Patreon. And if you listen to the podcast, please stay hydrated. Have a great